What kind of crime could possibly justify a punishment so gruesome that it left the condemned twisted, shattered, and displayed like a grotesque warning to all who passed? In medieval Europe, the answer was chillingly simple: anything that challenged authority, order, or the very fabric of society. Known as the breaking wheel, or Raiden, in the German-speaking lands, this method of execution was more than just a death sentence, it was annihilation. To be sentenced to the wheel meant not only physical destruction, but also social erasure. Murderers, highway robbers, traitors, and even those accused of sorcery or heresy could meet this fate. It was never a private act, it had to be public, theatrical, and unforgettable, so that each strike against the condemned also hammered fear into the hearts of the living. The breaking wheel was widespread in the Holy Roman Empire, France, and parts of Eastern Europe. In France, it was codified under the Code Louis of 1670, though in truth it had been used centuries before. German legal traditions were even more explicit. The Sachsenspiegel, a 13th century law code compiled by Eike von Repgow, decreed, "He who commits a murder on the road, without feud or cause, shall be broken upon the wheel." This legal precision reveals how medieval justice sought not only punishment but also symbolism. Crimes that shattered communal trust demanded a punishment equally shattering. But this horror was not applied equally. Medieval society was rigidly hierarchical, and one social class determined not only privilege in life but also dignity in death. Nobles, when condemned, were usually executed swiftly by sword or axe, considered more honorable methods. The wheel, however, was for the common man, the outsider, the expendable. To be broken on the wheel was to be cast into the lowest realm of dishonor, where even death denied dignity. Records from 16th century Saxony show how far this principle extended. Repeat offenders, whether thieves, arsonists, or violent criminals, could find themselves sentenced to the wheel even if their crimes were not murder. If their actions spread fear during famine, war, or political instability, the authorities might escalate the punishment. For them, the wheel became less a legal instrument and more a tool of spectacle, an act designed to reinforce obedience and the terrifying reach of justice. Yet the punishment was never confined to the moment of execution. It began long before the condemned reached the scaffold. Once a sentence was pronounced, humiliation became the first stage of death. The condemned were stripped of dignity, paraded barefoot, and bloodied through the streets. Sometimes they carried the very wheel that would destroy them, other times a heavy wooden cross, echoing Christ's suffering yet twisted into cruelty. This was public theatre, justice performed as ritual. Crowds gathered, children jeered, rotten food and stones were hurled. Priests marched beside the prisoner, crucifix held high, urging repentance that seemed both merciful and accusatory. In Catholic regions, confession might still be offered, though often it came too late. Church bells rang not in mourning, but as a grim summons, calling the community to witness what awaited those who transgressed the order of their world. Every step of the journey reinforced a lesson. This could be you. Eyewitness accounts from Nuremberg and Frankfurt describe these processions in haunting detail. The prisoner stumbling, the mob howling, and the executioner walking with cold purpose. At times, additional torment was inflicted even before arrival. In cases of sacrilege, rebellion, or the murder of nobility, hot irons or whips might be used during the march, ensuring the condemned reached the scaffold already broken in body and spirit. The chosen place of execution was equally symbolic. In the Holy Roman Empire, these sites were often raised hills or scaffolds beyond the town walls, known as the Hochgericht, the High Court. Visible from afar, they stood as permanent reminders that justice did not hide in secrecy, but ruled in plain sight. Crossroads, gallows hills, and open plains ensured that the act would be remembered by anyone who passed. By the time the condemned finally reached the scaffold, many were barely able to stand. Yet ritual demanded precision. Before the breaking could begin, their crimes were read aloud, proclaimed before all. Sometimes the executioner himself did it. Other times, a town crier shouted, "By order of the law and the emperor's justice, this man shall be broken on the wheel for his wicked deeds." The condemned was then bound, arms stretched wide, body trembling, lashed to the wooden spokes that would soon serve as the instrument of their obliteration. The crowd hushed, waiting for the executioner's hammer to fall, for the terrible ritual of bone against iron to commence. The breaking wheel was about to begin. Once the condemned lay stretched upon the spokes, the solemn ritual of the breaking wheel began. The executioner, known in German as the Scharfrichter, stood as the central figure, his duty both feared and strangely respected. With a heavy hammer or iron bar in hand, he moved with calculated precision. This was no frenzied act of violence, but a deliberate performance of law and order, carried out in silence except for the sound of bone shattering. The process was methodical. The executioner worked limb by limb, striking at the joints, the elbows, the knees, the shins, ensuring that each blow rendered the condemned immobile yet conscious. Contemporary records from Nuremberg describe how the crowd often watched in stunned quiet, as though mesmerized by the terrifying balance of ritual and brutality. Some accounts even note that the executioner would strike in a specific sequence, designed to prolong suffering before finally delivering the blow to the chest or neck that ended it all. Not every wheel execution was the same. The severity varied according to the crime, the social outrage it caused, and the sentence written in the Strafordnung, the official order of punishment. For particularly heinous offences like murder of a noble, treason, or parricide, the condemned could be subjected to what was called the full execution by the wheel. Each limb was broken separately, and death could be delayed for hours, sometimes even longer. In certain cases, mercy was granted in the form of a final coup de grace, a swift strike to the chest or throat. But in others, death was left to hunger, thirst, or exposure. Saxony and Bavaria preserved especially cruel variations. Some criminals were woven through the wheel spokes after their limbs were broken, their bodies bent into grotesque positions and then hoisted high on a pole. There, they would linger in unimaginable agony until the elements or scavenging birds finally claimed them. The wheel thus became both the tool of execution and the stage of a drawn-out death. For medieval authorities, this was the true power of the punishment. Death was not the end, but the beginning of a warning. After the condemned finally succumbed, their body remained bound to the wheel, mounted atop a tall pole or wooden frame in full view of travellers and townsfolk. Execution sites were often placed at crossroads or on gallows hills, called Galgenberg in German, where commerce and community intersected. The sight of a broken body swaying in the wind spoke louder than any law code. Justice was ever present, inescapable, and merciless. Weeks could pass before the remains were removed. Records from the 16th century describe bodies left for months, slowly reduced to bone by weather and carrion birds. This denial of burial was no accident. In Christian Europe, burial in consecrated ground was essential for salvation. To be refused, it was a spiritual punishment, a rejection from both earthly society and the hope of eternal rest. Authorities understood the weight of this act. They weren't just executing a criminal, they were casting them out of memory, out of grace, out of history itself. Among the many who suffered this fate, one case became infamous for its horror. In 1581, near Cologne, a German bandit named Christmann Jennepertinger was sentenced to the wheel after a long career of robbery and murder. He endured the full series of blows, every limb shattered, but to the astonishment of guards and townspeople alike, he did not die. For 9 days, he remained alive, broken, exposed, denied food and water, his body a ruin, yet his consciousness unyielding. Guards were stationed to prevent anyone from offering aid, and his suffering became a gruesome spectacle. Chroniclers recorded the event, and even physicians later studied it as one of the most extreme examples of human survival under torment. The horror of his endurance gave the wheel an almost mythic power. If death was certain, suffering was unpredictable, and in that uncertainty lay terror. In the end, the breaking wheel was more than punishment. It was a theatre of cruelty, a ritual of control, and a message carved into both flesh and memory. Its legacy still lingers, unsettling to those who look back at how justice and terror once walked hand in hand. Perhaps the most haunting question is not why this was done, but what future generations will say about us. Which of our punishments, solitary confinement, death row, the lifelong cage of imprisonment, will seem as barbaric to them as the wheel seems to us today. As the Roman philosopher Seneca once warned, all cruelty springs from weakness.